The thought of the school closing is, I mean, personally for me, because we'd worked so hard in the early part of my time in Bierley to get a new building for the school. I mean, it's a very hard thing to cope with. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's a real bereavement experience in the last 2 years, coming to terms with all that. And there are plenty of people associated with the church and in the community that have felt very much the same.
It's something that you think in your head will never happen, and we did petition everywhere to give us strength. We wrote letters to MPs and all over the place we wrote letters to see that it could be retarded, but of course it wasn't. They'd made their mind up and this is what they were going to do. And when it's a long way away, you don't give it a great deal of thought, but as it gets nearer to you, the reality hits home and you think, you know, what will we do without the school?
I've not been headlong, but I had expected to finish my career in the school. It wasn't one I was going to move on from particularly, especially when 2.5 years ago we hoped to get a new building just down the road. And I thought that would be the next carrot that would keep me going to develop a brand new school. But unfortunately that's not going to happen. And for all the staff it's going to be a big change, and for the children in particular.
St John's Church at Bierley, to which the school has always been connected, was built as a chapel by the Richardson family in 1767, who then presided over the Bierley estate, a manor which dates back to before the Domesday Survey of 1086. The building of the chapel immediately preceded the beginning of what became called the Industrial Revolution, which was responsible for the immigration of workers, adults and children into Bierley, a rapidly growing centre for the production of iron and coal.
The land originally belonged to the Bierley Hall estate, and in 1819 the lady of the manor, as she was then, Frances Richardson Currer, allowed the church to use a building on the site as a Sunday school, in the sense of a Sunday school at that time, which was really learning to read and write, and not just an activity for young people or children whilst the service is going on in church, as it often means today.
Probably the most distinguished clergyman to be associated with the school was George Stringer Bull, or Parson Bull of Bierley, as he was affectionately known. Bull came to Bierley as its vicar in 1826 and stayed until 1838.
George Bull has a big name in this church because he's the guy who prevented children working more than 10 hours a day.
He came eventually to West Yorkshire as a young curate, worked first in Dewsbury at Hanging Heaton and then came to Bierley, and was very concerned with the conditions of children and young people in particular. He started off asking why they were falling asleep at Sunday school, and then discovered that it was because they were working the other 6 days a week, up to 16 hours a day in the mills and factories.
Unfortunately, there are no known records of the school dating back to Parson Bull's period in Bierley, the first logbook entry being made on January 5th, 1863 by the then head teacher Mr. Kendall.
Commenced the school year this day with 43 boys, 34 girls full-timers and 3 boys and 21 girls part-timers. Total 101. This is more than average for the past 5 years of same week.
The parish of Bierley's longest serving vicar to date was the Reverend Charles Hine, a Gloucestershire man who was quick to endear himself to his new community. Like George Bull before him, Hine showed great concern for the welfare of the children of Bierley.
Charles Hine came to Bierley in the late 1860s, so he was here just before the Foster Education Act came in. The school under his leadership became established as a full-time, all through the week day school for boys and girls, and and the buildings were refurbished in the 1870s, largely as a result of his efforts.
It was towards the end of Hind's incumbency that Bierley Church School suffered its greatest setback to date. A fire occurred on the 23rd of February 1911, sweeping away a large section of the school, causing sadness to the parishioners who had given great service to the building which had stood without threat for 40 years. The then headmaster, Mr. Rogers, recorded the events.
This morning, prayers had just been said and classes settled in places for scripture lessons when the caretaker informed the head teacher that the schools were on fire. The head teacher at once arranged for the summoning of the fire brigade and then saw that all children vacated the school under usual system of fire drill. All proceeded quietly and in good order into the yard, where they were kept under control until arrival of fire engines, etc. Meanwhile, the fire destroyed entirely the infants' classroom and the roofs of infants' and girls' room.
The building was gutted. The children had to move out temporarily, but the insurance money, along with the money that had been raised already, and the fact that the fire spurred people into activity, meant that when the school was rebuilt, it was rebuilt up to standard and continued. And the building that was reopened in 1912 is very much the building that we've known ever since. It's not been significantly altered since. That was all we knew about the fire until about 6 or 7 years ago, when some members of a local history group did some research and found some stories in local newspapers from the time, one of which recorded that the fire started when a large quantity of firelighters, which had been stacked next to the boiler, caught fire, which you might have thought was pretty much inevitable. And it's made us wonder whether the fire wasn't strictly accidental, and perhaps they had a very benign insurance assessor at the time. Certainly I wouldn't like to think that the vicar was seen running away with an oily rag and matches, but sometimes God moves in a mysterious way.
The Reverend Hein only just lived to oversee the rebuilding and modernisation of the school, which he had worked so hard to ensure the continuance of. Hein died